times people will give higher grades. That's just how we are. You go up to somebody, if you're a hunter, and they hunt. I don't hunt, but if you're a male and there's somebody who hunts, you're going to really sort of bond with that person. Or I love music, so if somebody comes up and they play guitar, or they're playing the violin, it's like, oh my gosh, you know, I love that person. But beyond that, you know, you've got to see the whole person. And 3 interviews is going to do it. If you have a really bad, not even bad, if you have a lower interview score on one of your interviews than the other 2, we will say, we're going to bring you back for 2 more interviews because we want to make it fair. The interviews begin the 1st of September and they end in mid-March. It's like 27 interview days. Every Friday, starting in September, we interview, unless it's Christmas or Thanksgiving. And so we bring about 15 or 16 students to campus that day. And this is kind of what the interview day looks like. We have a morning session. You have to be there at 8:30 in the morning. And we keep you in the dean's office, in the conference room, for about an hour and a half. And we do that because you're going to be welcomed by Dr. Underwood, Dr. Dees, their associate deans. You're going to hear from Dr. Hazelmark a little bit about the curriculum. Somebody from financial aid will talk with you a little bit about paying for medical school and how much it costs. And you can hear all about student life. And not only is it an information session, the real reason that we keep you there for an hour and a half is we know when you come on campus, it is a stressful time. No amount of me telling you, don't worry about it, it's going to be fine, we're nice people, everybody who interviews you is a nice person, you're still worried to death because in reality, this day is going to determine what happens to you in life. And so we know, and so we want to bring you there. Not that you won't get a second chance if you don't get in, but we want you to see everybody who's there, and really MUSC has some great administrators. Everybody is nice, and when people come, it's a welcoming campus, and we try to be as welcoming as we can. So when you leave at 10 o'clock, you should feel a whole lot better than you did at 8:30 walking in that morning. So we let you go on your interviews, and we sort of do shepherd you. It's kind of like, I'm telling you, by the time we get through this interview process, it's like all of these students, we get to know a lot of the students real well, and we are just, it's devastating to us if the student doesn't get medical school. Little does the student know how much we agonize over it. Yes, it's great when I can send the emails, because right after the admissions meeting, I send the email saying, yeah, you got medical school. Well, those were great emails. We so hate to send you're on hold, because so many of these students are absolutely amazing. We know we can't take everybody, but eventually the really good students are going to get in, so even we work with them until they do. But anyway, you have your interviews from 10 to 12. A lot of doctors at MUSC interview, and so everybody who interviews has interviewed for a number of years, and they really are out to get the best out of you. They're not there to trip you up with bad questions or anything. And so Dr. Smith was saying when we went in his class earlier, the students had a list of 10 most common questions that you may be asked. And so I said, I want to get a copy, Joseph. But I just want to see if these are some of the questions that our doctors ask. But you really don't know when you go in somebody's office what kind of questions you're going to be asked, because every doctor is a little bit different. And so Dr. Hazelmark, when she interviews, she teaches anatomy, and she's an instructor, and her interview questions will be a little bit different from Dr. Underwood. We laugh about Dr. Underwood because he's OBGYN. He has taught the women his entire life. They tell him everything. He can find out more in 30 minutes from a student. He comes to my office, he's got all kinds of stuff. They tell him everything. I'm like, they told you that in 30 minutes? Oh, yes. And so that interview in 30 minutes may be different from somebody you see who is a surgeon who keeps you an hour and asks the questions. But we know that they're not going to be stressful. They're going to be as non-stressful as they can, but they want to make sure that you think, and if they ask any kind of controversial questions, that you know why you're answering the way you do. So if you, for instance, if they ask, what are your views on the health care issues, you need to know a little bit about that. And so coming in, Dr. Hazelmark and I were sort of talking about somebody last year who didn't do well, but had actually had put on her application that she had a lot of background in working in healthcare, and when she asked about the healthcare issues, it was like deer in the headlights. Well, how could you not answer that if you really had been working in the area where you, so it's not as, none of the questions are meant to trip you up. But the one thing I always tell students, be honest on your application, because you can't believe that some people wouldn't be, but they're not always truly honest, or they omit things that they should have put in there. And if we ever find that out on an interview, it's really not good. That student's not going to be good. Then you have a tour of campus with our students, and that's always a fun time. You go all around and you see the campus. And then you have lunch with the medical students, and we don't let the faculty eat with you because it is stressful. So if you're sitting there eating with a bunch of the faculty from the admissions committee, it's like another interview. So if they're sitting beside you asking you things, you feel like, I can't really eat this chicken right now because I can't put it in my mouth, and look bad. You can't do it. And so the thing that always blanks out here, I don't know why, but if somebody had to have interviews in the afternoons from 2 to 3. But that's kind of what a day's like when we tell students, plan to be with us till at least 2 o'clock. And it seems like it's a long day, but it goes quickly. Okay, now, the admissions committee, it's really based, there's 2 parts to the admissions committee. And I would say, this first part that we call subjective, these are the traits that all of us would like to see in practicing physicians. And so we've all gone to physicians, or we've had family members go to physicians that we really didn't like. And there's a reason you wouldn't like the physician. And a lot of times it's the bedside manner. If you go to somebody, and years ago, the person I worked with, he had a great doctor who was a nephrologist. And he was the smartest man in the world, but he was so intimidating. I'm telling you, every time he came into the office, people were shying away from him because he was very, almost harsh. And so she said to me one day, if I'm ever sick, I want to go to him. I said, if I'm ever sick, I don't want to go to him because I want somebody who's going to be nice, smart, but personable. And so the traits that we want to see in those interviews are good interpersonal skills. We want to see that you have good judgment, that you can relate to others, that you have empathy, that you're motivated, enthusiasm for medicine. In Dr. Smith's class the last time, somebody spoke up and said he wanted to see a physician who smiled. And everybody laughed, and I said, well, actually, that means you're enthusiastic. Somebody who's a happy, smiling person, that's better than somebody who has no enthusiasm, they have no energy. And the years I've worked with physicians, the one thing I know you have to have energy. You have to be somebody who's up early, going all day, not somebody who just fades out after a few hours. You couldn't be a physician. So those are things we're looking at, and we're actually grading on a scale of 1 to 10 how you rate during your interview in those things. And so one of the big things we rate you on is judgment. And students always say, how in the world do you, how would you know judgment in a 30 or minute interview an hour? But you can just tell by the things that students say to you whether they have good judgment or not. And we could almost write a book on things that you should not do, what not to do when you're trying to get medical school. And even though that morning session I told you all about, Dr. Dees is one of our deans, and she's psychiatry. She's a psychiatrist. And she always tells students, now when you go in for your interviews, it should give them pointers. These are things you want to think about. Don't do this, don't do that. Inevitably, during the year, we're going to have 5, 6, 7 students who do it. And it's simple things like turn off your cell phone. If your cell phone rings, don't answer it. And don't carry on a conversation. We've had students do that in the middle of an interview, and they talk for a minute. I always think that's sort of like a death wish. That's like, I don't want to go to medical school and I'm going to prove it. And so they don't want to go. And just never use profanity in an interview. I have students doing that all the time. It's like, I can't even believe students said this. Let's see what else. I always say this is before you get to the interview stage. Y'all have to be thinking professionally. And I know a lot of y'all are seniors and juniors and you're already thinking that way. but you'd be amazed at the email addresses that we see when we look at applications. You can't even think of the student's name for trying to figure out why would they put this on an email, because they appear for an interview and it's like, that's the person who's, that. Or if you try to call them on the phone, crazy music, like a wild party going on, and you can't even leave a message for like a minute. I'm like, I can't leave a message on there. And so those are things that really, it's sort of like that. You don't want to think that that could influence an admissions office, but it can really influence an admissions office. Anything, all these, the media that y'all have now, the stuff y'all can do on the computer and not Facebook and all the things. Be careful what you put out there, because we are now looking into that. Because we didn't do it for a while, and we actually have a student now that we wish we had done it before this student had ever been admitted, because it's the most bizarre stuff that he's got out there that anybody can see. So we are now on the alert for this. So if you go to a wild party and they take pictures of you with all kinds of alcohol and cigarettes in your nose, and I mean, just think about this being a physician 4 years down the road. If you get in medical school, you've got to start thinking about that right now. So I always say, make your email address something normal, Taylor WL or whatever, so that you don't get that thing where the whole admissions office is saying, okay, we've got to really screen this person well, because this is a little bizarre. That all speaks to judgment. So think about that. Okay, the other part that y'all can be doing right now is equally important. It's your accomplishments. And so these are your letters of recommendation. When you ask somebody to write a letter, number one, make sure it's somebody who's going to write you a good letter. And ask that person, do you feel comfortable writing me a letter of recommendation? Because so many students think, I made a good grade in this professor's class, ask for a letter of recommendation. You don't ever see that letter. You sign the confidentiality, so you're not going to see it. But every now and then there are some bad letters that are written. And we can't really say to the student, Dr. Smith wrote an awful letter about you, because it's confidential and you couldn't do that. And so you just want to make sure that the people that write your letter ask them that, and get good letters of recommendation, because they're going to be graded up to 10. So students who are outstanding and the professors write really good things about your characteristics and why you'd be a great physician, you're going to get a 10. If somebody says, I don't know this student that well, but he or she made a really great grade in my class, made an A, and was one of 3 people in the class to make an A, that's really still just an average interview. That's an average recommendation. So be thinking about who you want to write your letters. Leadership, we like to see students who really have taken part in activities and sort of moved into a leadership role. It doesn't necessarily have to be Clemson. It can be in the community. It can be in the church. Anything in your past that shows leadership. The last 2 are critical. You've got to have some kind of volunteerism. You've got to have shadowed and been around sick patients, because if not, how would you know you want to go to medical school? And the shadowing, volunteerism is a little bit different, because students will say sometimes, what if I work, but I got paid? Well, that's fine. We just want to see that you've got that service background where you really do want to give back. That's what that's all about. And so when we look at the final index, and we are a numbers, it's the numbers that to get in medical school. This is the formula to get in medical school. It's your adjusted GPA counts 1/4. And your best MCAT score, and we don't mix and match, it's the best testing counts 1/4. The 3 interviews coming together, just say if I interviewed you in all the traits, like your interpersonal skills, your judgment, if all mine averaged up to an 8.8, Dr. Hazelmartin might give you a 9.2, and another doctor may give you an 8.0. Those 3 are averaged together into one number. I don't know what happened there. I'm just going to leave you. Just leave it. Is that okay? And then the objective, that's their accomplishment. So again, all 3 interview ratings go together to make that accomplishment. Well, anyway,
Just keep talking, can't talk.
So, then you get a final index. So just